Freedom versus oppression. The 1,000-Year War is about slavery. It's always been about slavery. Since the beginning of human civilizations, there have always been people who seek to gain at the expense of others. And at the same time, there have always been people fighting for freedom against those who seek to enslave them. History, or his story, is our story, the human story. Our history describes conflict and the struggles and the triumphs, the highs and the lows of human progression through time. Albert Einstein described our course through time like a pendulum, which is always swinging back and forth between tyranny and freedom. Thus far in our human story, every mighty civilization that humanity has pushed up has been powered by some form of slavery, and at the same time, every mighty civilization that humanity has pushed up has fallen. The human animal is a young species. According to our best scientific estimates, our species has been around in its current form for about 200,000 years. That is a very short amount of time in evolutionary terms. There are species that have been on this planet for millions of years. The animals which have survived for millions of years have found their niche balance with the rest of the natural world. The human species, on the other hand, has not found its balance. Humanity is self-serving, short-sighted, and self-destructive. The human animal is clearly in its adolescent stage of development. We act like fully evolved grown-ups. We think we are fully evolved grown-ups, but at the same time we are arrogant and ignorant of the things that we have still yet to learn. We think we have already mastered life, but our immaturity prevents us from being humble enough to recognize that we have mastered almost nothing, except perhaps our ability to capitalize upon one another and the earth for our own short-term material gain. Human evolution is ongoing. We are not the same humanity that we were 100 years ago. We are not even the same humanity that we were 20 years ago. As we continue to press through time, we develop new technologies and new understandings, and we also continue to struggle to push the giant pendulum away from oppression and tyranny and towards individual freedom and liberty. In 1989, I attended the National Boy Scout Jamboree at Fort A.P. Hill in Virginia. It was a 2-week jamboree. The first week was spent touring historical sites surrounding Washington, D.C. One of the places we visited was a military academy. I don't remember the name, but I do remember gathering around an obelisk, a kind of miniature version of the Washington Monument. This erection was around 15 feet tall. One of the officers from the academy had been walking us around the campus, telling us about its history. We had stopped at this obelisk so our tour guide could explain its significance. At the beginning of each new year, the incoming freshmen are all gathered around this erection. A flag is placed at the top, and the monument is covered in grease. As the new recruits are standing around this giant erection, they are told, all at once, that the student who is able to capture the flag from the top of this erection will be given all A's for their first semester. Our tour guide explained that it always plays out the same, year after year. For the first half hour or so, there is mass pandemonium as the cadets scrap and tussle over each other trying to climb above the rest. The officer explained that it is only after trying and failing and wearing themselves out that the young recruits stop scrapping against each other and begin coordinating and working together. He explained that there is only one way to get the flag down from the erection, and that is to work together as a team instead of competing against each other. In our most mature state, human beings understand that living and working cooperatively produces abundance and social stability. Together we stand, divided we fall. The human animal is a group species. We have not evolved to live as individual lone survivors. We get through life by living and working in groups, in families, and communities. No man is an island. At some point in our early development, our ancient ancestors figured out that group survival is much less work than individual survival. Therefore, today, we each specialize in our jobs. A healthy human community relies on having a farmer, a butcher, a carpenter, a tailor, a baker, and so on. You do what you do well, and I will contribute what I do well, and together we create synergy. If we all put into our community, then we will get back exponentially more than we each have to put in as individuals. There are many today who like the idea of off-grid homesteading. What this represents is self-reliance and self-sustainability rather than relying upon or being part of the larger community. There have been times in history where people believe in and flock to participate in the greater human community, and there are times like now where people have lost their faith in the greater community and no longer trust the viability of the greater community. Therefore, they remove themselves from reliance upon the greater community in favor of self-reliance and independence. This is the giant pendulum in action. There is a part of me that really likes the idea of living in a self-reliant, off-grid homestead, but I am well aware of how much work is required for one or two people, or even for a small family, to maintain all of the homestead chores that need doing on a daily basis. I don't have much interest in working all by myself, sun up, sun down, 7 days a week, just to keep food in my belly and a roof over my head. If I were to live in a self-sustaining homestead, I would want to do it as a group, a community, or a tribe of honest, hard-working people. As a laborer, I have always enjoyed hard manual work. I especially like it when I know as soon as we complete the work that needs to be accomplished, we can have the freedom to go float down the river and enjoy a beer. Many hands makes light work. When we all pitch in and do our part, the work that needs to get done gets done with great efficiency. When we accomplish the work that needs to be done in order to sustain our basic needs, we are allowed freedom to spend the rest of our day or week doing what we want to do instead of doing what we have to do. The first thing our ancestors figured out was that surviving in groups was easier than trying to survive alone. Looking at our history, it is clear that not too much later, some humans figured out that they could get out of having to do manual labor altogether if they could just figure out how to get other people to do the manual labor while they stand back and supervise, or if they can rationalize the importance or the necessity of doing non-labor-oriented work. One of the things that appears to be an absolute truth about humanity is that no one wants to work harder than they have to. If a human being can figure out a way to get a job done easier or quicker, or without having to do any work at all, the human will almost certainly take the easier path. This is at least always true for the immature humans. As soon as we figured out that it was easier to live in groups and tribes and communities in order to meet our needs, there were also people who figured out that they could get out of doing any work at all as long as they could convince the others to do their manual labor for them. Many of us who are craftsmen and makers of things have learned to enjoy our manual labor. We have come to value and appreciate the feeling of being physically exhausted after an honest day's labor. We have come to appreciate the feelings associated with producing remarkable things with our own hands and standing back at the end of the day or at the end of a job with pride for the thing that we have just created. In fact, there are a few of us who enjoy building and making things not for the love of money or material gain, but instead we enjoy building and making things for the sake of beauty and for the enjoyment and betterment of humanity. Some of us desire to leave behind a legacy of craftsmanship that future generations will marvel over and will enjoy well into the future, for hundreds or hopefully thousands of years after we have grown old and left this planet. This is what maturity looks like. In his book Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain tells a story about a time Tom Sawyer was tasked with painting a white picket fence. Tom did not want to have to do this dreadful manual labor, but he did want to get paid for the work to be done. So he figured out a way to manipulate the other kids in the neighborhood into doing the work for him. Tom sat there talking to himself about how much fun he was having and how much he liked painting fences. Every kid that passed by, Tom told them how much fun it was, and each kid was curious enough to want to know what he was talking about. Tom handed out paintbrushes to every kid in the neighborhood and got them to paint his fence for him. When the job was done, he went and told the owner of the house, with his hand out ready to receive payment, which he did not share with the other kids. For centuries, human beings have been devising ways to get out of having to do the work required to meet basic human needs. For centuries, human beings have been coming up with clever and deceptive ways to benefit and profit from the manual labor of others, while they themselves do as little work as possible. There are several methods or techniques that people can employ in order to get others to do the work while they themselves collect the fruits of that labor. The most primitive and basic way to get people to work for the benefit and profit of others is through violence, or the threat and fear of violence. This method is called chattel slavery. For unknown reasons, our modern history begins around the time of the Egyptian civilization. We have been around as a species for over 200,000 years, but for some reason, We only have historical documentation and written accounts for the past 6,000 to 8,000 years. What humanity was up to for almost the entirety of our 200,000-year existence is pretty much a total mystery. The first mighty civilization that our Christian history acknowledges is the Egyptian civilization, which was a culture built upon human slavery. As the biblical story goes, Moses did not like that his people were made to be slaves, so he led them into freedom. In the great human conflict between freedom and oppression, Moses was a freedom fighter. Oppression is a man-made hardship. Oppression is not something that humans have to endure at the hand of Mother Nature. Instead, we suffer from the burdens of oppression at the hands of other human beings. Oppression is the effect or the burden that humans feel as caused by those who take from or capitalize upon or otherwise exploit. Oppression is the burden that the ones who labor carry as they work to support the basic needs and wants of those who are standing upon their backs or who are benefiting and taking from their labor. There are those who do the work and there are those who profit from the work, the working class and the ruling class. The ruling class provides no labor, does no actual work that produces fruit, clothing, or shelter. But at the same time, the ruling class eats the finest foods, wears the finest clothing, and lives in the finest homes. This means the laboring class, the ones who are actually doing the work that produces tangible wealth, the laborers have to work twice as hard to produce the food, clothing, and shelter, not just for themselves, but also for all of the ruling class that is being supported by their labor. The ultimate goal for human beings is to have everything one wants and needs at the push of a button without having to do any work at all. The wealthy and the elite do not plow fields, nor do they have any dirt under their fingernails. The rich and the famous do not sew their own clothing or build their own homes. The President of the United States does not clean his own bathroom or wash his own dirty dishes, nor does he clean his own laundry. Our cultural idols live the lifestyle that all human beings dream of and aspire for. The humans who are not wealthy are willing to work very hard towards the goal of building a future for themselves in which they can retire. Retirement comes only when a person has cultivated enough wealth to make other people do the things that they themselves do not want to do. Before the abolishment of chattel slavery in the 1860s, the slave owners in the South were able to live the type of lifestyle that modern-day humans fantasize about and aspire for. If a slave owner was hungry or thirsty, all they had to do was ring a bell or give a voice command, and the thing that they wanted or needed would be brought to them, almost magically. This type of existence does appear to be the goal and aspiration for all human beings. It also appears to be our ultimate evolutionary destination. When we take a look at our development of technologies and automation, it becomes clear that in the future, humanity will have the ability to replace all forms of human slavery with technology and automation. Slavery is a social technology which enables a few humans to live a futuristic, easy lifestyle, but which comes at the expense of oppressing the masses. This is a primitive and immature methodology for achieving a life of convenience and luxury. Humanity is rapidly approaching the turning point in our evolutionary development in which we transition away from an immature species which powers civilizations with human slavery, and we transition into a mature species in which we employ technology and automation to power our mighty cultures. It is certain that in the future a more civilized and more mature humanity will look back at our current form of economic slavery as primitive, uncivilized, and even barbaric. Future generations will look back at today's modern economic slavery with the same disgust that we have when we look back at the barbaric practice of enslaving black people. Everyone wants to eat healthy food, but no one wants to do the labor of plowing, planting, cultivating, and harvesting food. Everyone wants to wear nice clothes, but no one wants to work in a garment factory. Everyone wants to live in a nice house, but no one wants to dig foundations or pour concrete or hang drywall. The immature human solution to getting nice things without having to labor for those nice things is to manipulate or force others into doing that work. Slavery. Builders and makers spent their time creating technologies and machines and innovations that will do labor for us. Those who can not build or make, they just take from others by putting themselves into so-called leadership positions. The slave owners in the South resisted the Industrial Revolution. When the makers and the inventors said, "You don't need slaves anymore, we have invented a machine that can pick cotton much more efficiently," the makers and the inventors and the industrialists said, "We can mass-produce pipes that can bring fresh water right into your kitchen." The slave owners said, "We don't want your cotton-picking machines, and we don't want your plumbing. We already have a way to accomplish those things." Chattel slavery was abolished in the 1860s in the United States because of the Industrial Revolution. In the end, when humanity finally rounds the corner into maturity, technology will replace slavery altogether. We are already headed in that direction. We now have things like 3D printed homes. Driverless cars are going to replace the profession of truck driving and taxi drivers and delivery drivers. And automated GPS-controlled tractors are replacing farm labor. If the end goal for humanity is to live a life of luxury without having to do labor all day, every day, the evolutionary answer is technology and automation. In our future, instead of forcing human beings to do the work that no one wants to do, a more mature and civilized humanity will employ technology and automation to do that work. When we think of slavery, the first thing that comes to mind is chattel slavery, but there are many other forms of slavery which are much more covert and crafty. Besides chattel slavery, there is also economic slavery, mental and emotional slavery, and spiritual slavery. Chattel slavery is obvious. It is overt slavery. When whips and chains and violence are employed to motivate the slaves to work, it is obvious to the slaves that they are enslaved. Slaves who are aware that they are enslaved are prone to revolt and rebellion. But when covert methods are employed to trick and deceive slaves into working for the benefit of others, the slaves are not aware that they are enslaved. Slaves who do not understand that they are enslaved will not revolt or rebel. The craft of getting human beings to labor for the benefit of a master is its own technology. Chattel slavery is the most primitive and basic technology for making people labor for the benefit of a master, but it has its weaknesses and shortcomings. Deception and manipulation is a much more crafty technology of oppression. Just like Tom Sawyer manipulated the other kids into willfully painting the fence so that he could collect the payment. Deception is the social technology that exploiters employ to manipulate or trick slaves into willingly participating in their own enslavement. Slavery has its own craft or technology. Just the same, the resistance to slavery has its own methods and technology. When faced with chattel slavery, the enslaved can either choose to obey and do as they are told, or they can stand up and fight against the master, or the slaves can try to run away from the master. The story of Moses is the first example we have of an enslaved people fighting against being enslaved. Between the options of fight or flight, Moses chose flight. Moses led his people out of slavery and into freedom by running away into the wilderness. Egypt is our first historical example of a civilization employing the primitive technology of chattel slavery to power itself. Egypt is also the first example of an enslaved people employing the most primitive technology for freeing themselves from slavery, flight, or running away. Our second historical example of a civilization powered by slavery is the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire learned from the failures of the Egyptian Empire and invented a solution. They came up with an answer to the slaves running away to find freedom. The Roman Empire invented colonialism. Colonialism is a way for the slave master to say, "You can run away from slavery, but you cannot hide from slavery. We will find you and enslave you no matter where you go." The first most primitive form of slavery is chattel slavery, but because it's obvious to the slaves, they have a tendency to resist with fight or flight. When colonialism is employed to enslave, the option to run away or flight is taken away from the enslaved, and the only option is to fight. Just like Moses, Jesus was also a freedom fighter. Jesus lived in occupied Palestine. When Jesus went out his front door in the morning, he was met with a foreign military force policing the streets of his hometown. Jesus did not like being enslaved by the Roman Empire, and he did not like being tricked into religious servitude. Moses fought against being enslaved by leading his people to run away from the slave master. The slave master invented colonialism to prevent the slaves from running away. Because Jesus was enslaved by colonialism, he could not fight against the slave master by running away. If Jesus was going to stand up against being enslaved, he was going to have to invent a new method or a new and improved technology to respond to the method of colonialism. Jesus invented passive resistance, which is a way of choosing to not participate in or not enabling the slave master. When a Roman soldier pointed his sword at Jesus and said, "You'd better do what I say or else," Jesus simply said, "I'm not going to do what you say, so go ahead and give me the or else." Jesus said, "I don't care what you do to me. I'm not going to go along with the game that you want me to play." So the slave masters nailed Jesus to a cross to make an example out of him to all the other slaves. By publicly torturing and murdering Jesus, the slave master was showing to the other slaves what would happen to them if they chose not to cooperate with the slave master. Jesus invented a new method, a new technology for standing up against the slave master. Since he could not flee or run away from colonialism, he instead self-sacrificed as a way of choosing to not enable his abuser and not cooperating with the slave master's game. The Jesus method for non-cooperation and willing self-sacrifice proved to be a very powerful method for resisting slavery. The Jesus method was employed by Mahatma Gandhi to expel the British colonizers out of India, and later Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. also employed the Jesus method to stand up against and push back against the oppression of his people. When the oppressor said to Dr. King, "You had better not sit in the front of this bus or else," Dr. King said, "Okay, give me the or else." When the oppressor said to Dr. King, "You better not march in our streets or else," Dr. King said, "You'd better give me the or else, 'cause I'm gonna march in your streets." For 300 years, the followers of Jesus walked in the footsteps of Jesus and self-sacrificed. For over 300 years, any time a Roman soldier stopped a Jesus follower in the streets and said, "You better do as I say or else," the followers of Jesus said, "Okay, please give me the or else," and they threw themselves upon the swords of the Roman soldiers. For 300 years, the Jesus movement caused havoc upon the Roman slave master and ruined his game. By the time the Roman Emperor Constantine inherited the empire, the Jesus movement had almost completely dissolved its oppressive tactics. If Constantine was going to save his empire, he was going to have to invent a new method or a new technology to stop the movement that Jesus started. Constantine eventually came up with a very effective solution. If you can't beat them, join them. Constantine pretended to convert to a believer and follower of Jesus, and he invented a new religion using Jesus as his mascot. Moses came up with the answer to chattel slavery: run away. The slave master came up with a solution to slaves running away: colonialism. Jesus came up with an answer to colonialism by saying, "I refuse to cooperate or participate in my own enslavement. I would rather the slave master kill me than participate in slavery." Constantine came up with an answer to Jesus' method of consciously choosing non-cooperation. Constantine invented the new and improved method, or the new and improved technology, of using deception to trick and manipulate the slaves into willfully participating in their own enslavement. Constantine helped develop the new and improved method for enslaving humans: mental and spiritual slavery. The slave master would later go on to perfect its methodology by adding emotional and sexual slavery. Deception is the primary tool for mental slavery. The nature of deception is such that those who have been deceived are not aware that they have been deceived. When deception is successful, the deceived go around thinking that they know the truth, when in fact the only thing they know are lies. When deception and manipulation are employed by the master, the slave is made to think that everything is normal and that this is just how life is. Covert oppression employs the technology of deception to manipulate and trick the slaves into going along with slavery. The only way to fight against deception is with truth. When deception is employed to enslave people, the only way to stand up and fight against this form of enslavement is with truth and knowledge of truth. Constantine invented a religion to deceive humanity into slavery. The truth, with a capital T, is that Jesus was not a Christian, and his name was not Jesus Christ. The name Christ is a title that the Catholic Empire bestowed upon Jesus in order to magnify him as their mascot. The Emperor Constantine was replacing the old Roman Empire with the new and improved Holy Catholic Roman Empire, and he needed his Jesus mascot to be bigger and better than any other spiritual mascot. Jesus did not create a church. He did not create a religion. Before he was killed, Jesus did not name the Pope as his successor. Jesus did not create the Christian empire. The book of Matthew was not written by the Apostle Matthew. The book of Mark was not written by the Apostle Mark. The book of Luke was not written by Luke. And the book of John was not written by John. These 4 books were written by unknown authors several generations after the life and death of Jesus. It is most likely that all 4 of these Gospels are modified copies of one original source. At the time of the Council of Nicaea, when the New Testament was invented, it is now known that there were at least 30 or more Gospels floating around the social atmosphere. We only know about the other Gospels because of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. After the Council of Nicaea wrote the New Testament, the new Christian leadership set out and destroyed all evidence of Gospels other than Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Gospels that were discarded and destroyed, known as the Gnostic Gospels, were more focused on the life and teachings of Jesus, while at the same time placed little or no significance upon his murder. Gospels like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of Thomas focus on the life that Jesus lived and the words that came out of his mouth. The Gospels that the Christian chose to put in their Bible, while ignoring the rest, are almost entirely focused upon the torturous murder of their mascot. In other words, Christianity is not the religion that celebrates the life and teachings of Jesus, but instead celebrates and glorifies his murder, as if his death was the most significant thing about his life. The Christian religion worships and glorifies human suffering. Of course, the Council of Nicaea had to embellish and invent a few miracles to make sure their mascot was extra special. Other spiritual mascots like the Buddha are not powerful enough to manifest such miracles. Christians do not worship Jesus. They do not even attempt to live like him or walk in his footsteps. Rather than worshiping and serving Jesus, modern-day Christians worship a book called the Bible. This Bible was not written by Jesus, and it was not written by God. The Christian Bible was written by men, not just by any men, but the Christian Bible was written by power-hungry men who were looking to possess and control and profit from other human beings.